Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the Victory Podcast. On this episode, I got the opportunity to interview one of my really good friends, Vanda. Vanda hosts a sports podcast, and she'll tell you a lot more throughout the interview about that. We talked a bit about podcasts, mental health, sports, and a host of other fun topics a little bit along the way. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this fun and a little funny conversation with one of my good friends. So, hello everybody, and on the Victory Podcast, I'm here with my good friend, Vanda, who hosts her own podcast called the Tight Ends Podcast, and we're going to talk a little bit about her background, how she got into podcasting, how she's used that sports podcast to talk a little bit about mental health and other different topics beyond just sports health, and wrap up about her social media and information, and maybe a little plug for her trailer, which we'll get into as far as why we're plugging a trailer that we're not sponsored for, but if they want to, it's fine.
All
cool
right,
sponsored. I don't have any, so it's fine. So thanks for joining. I don't have any, so it's fine. So thanks for joining me, Vanda.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This is super exciting. I feel like I've sort of helped bring this podcast about a little bit.
For sure. Vanda is the reason I kind of made this more into a podcast versus just writing a book.
You could do it all.
Podcast versus just writing a book.
You could do it all. I know that you can do it all, but when you told me the idea, I said, this sounds like a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So for the folks who don't know you, which is everyone who's listening, that isn't me editing the podcast. Don't know you, which is everyone who's listening, that isn't me editing the podcast. Let's give them a little bit of background of who you are, kind of how we met, a little bit about yourself, kind of whatever you feel like sharing.
All right. I am a Canadian, born in Sudbury, Ontario, and I've been living out west in Calgary, which is kind of near Banff. That's usually what I tell people who maybe aren't as familiar. I've been out here for about 20 years, and you and I met at work. We both worked at the same place in the same department. And I insist from you that I love in people. Anyways, yeah, so I live here in Calgary. I'm married. I have a dog and another dog on the way.
Oh,
fun. So she's already here, but she's just still with her dog mom while she grows up.
Yay!
I know, that was new news for you, I think. But
yay, yeah. I knew you were discussing and thinking about it. Hooray.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So Vanda, like she said, Vanda and I worked together. We just really connected and spent time outside of work. And then when I moved back to the U.S., still keeping in touch, have gone to Vanda and her husband, Frank, and all the fun stuff, met their dog, all this good thing.
Yeah. So I remember.
As a friend, sure.
Yeah, I remember when you were here and you didn't have a car, which is possible to do when you're in the city for sure. But it's very difficult to then get out to Banff and Banff National Park and the Canadian Rockies and things like that. So I kind of had said to you, like, have you been out there yet? Like, can we take you? Because my favorite thing in the world is taking people who've never been out to Canmore, Banff, and the Canadian Rockies to kind of show them around. And I loved the idea of people with a Southern American accent coming out to, like, the snow was falling on Christian's eyelashes in April. So it was pretty cool.
It definitely, I have less of a Southern accent than Christian does, because I'm really more of a transplant to the deeper South, born in Northern Virginia, DC metropolitan area, which really doesn't have much of an accent because it's a very transient isn't quite the word, but because it's so many of the jobs there are so connected to the government, as the administrations change, people go and leave and come and whatever, and military folks, and so people talk like places from all over. And so that's where my mom is from, and who, being a stay-at-home versus Christian born, bred, raised, grew up, went to college all the way until we moved to Canada, lived in New Orleans his whole life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And it's just my favorite thing. And I remember at work too, I would say to you, can I ask you something about the Black experience in America? And please just tell me if it's over the line or if you don't want to talk about it. And I hated you having to me represent Black America, but you were kind of the only one in the office.
Honestly, you did it in a way that you respected. Like, you asked it, and it's, I think, a way that you respected. Like, you asked it, and it's, I think it's important, especially in today's day, is to be able to have those conversations of, I'm seeking to understand in that context. And then if I tell you, look, this is, at least from my perspective, this part of the Black experience or the history of America or why things are the way they are, stage before you just, not you, but like in general, people will be like, well, why can't it just be X? And I don't understand it, especially from other parts of the world. And look, if you put in the context of the history of America or the history of the Black experience or this and that, and you were kind of like, oh, okay, then I kind of see where that leads you to this endpoint. Some in our department took that information and said, no, I don't think that's it.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit like, well, why'd you ask me? Don't ask me if you don't want to know.
Yeah, because I've had you on my podcast, and we, when I have this standard for especially tennis players, so I had ideas about the lines are pretty narrow, what I expect from a professional tennis player, because I think the sport is very, quote unquote gentleman's sport, and which of course is part of the problem. And so this is me seeing it from my point of view. Mm-hmm. So having you on my podcast to talk about, here's maybe what's facing as a Black woman in America. She's not just coming onto the court the way every other player is coming onto the court. And mm-hmm. that kind of thing really helped me to see, I was putting my, what I've gone through onto her in a sense where, what I've gone through onto her in a sense where I'm like, well, I wouldn't act that way. Right. Which of course is, anyway, so it's just such an interesting perspective to get your side of things. And I always and I love to get to know people, and I'm curious about people's experiences and where they're from and mm-hmm. how else, people's experiences and where they're from and mm-hmm. how else, we read the news about the United States and issues there. And I don't want to put that across everyone in America that, well, this is how the Americans think. It's like, right. It's ridiculous. So anyways, I always appreciate our conversation. It's ridiculous. So anyways, I always appreciate our conversations, and we never could just sit down and like talk about the Kardashians. No. Like it always had to get.
No, it's always gets deeper. And I think that's both of our personality, seeking to understand and be like, okay, but why? And then they, let's dig deeper into like why they would do that. I mean, I'll say most people don't just do things to do things. There's always some level of context, social context and structure within their actions and decisions. Right or wrong, there's some context to be given. So definitely. So yeah, that's a bit of background. Now you've already kind of leading into the next kind of topic of this podcast guru. As far as well, a person that I actually know, like I listen to podcasts, but I can't go on and reach out and be like, hey, host of this podcast, I have a question about podcasting. They may or may, there's resources, you put me on to the Lady Pod Squad way, but maybe you can kind of give a little context of how'd you get into podcasting and any tips for people, maybe a little quick overview of what your podcast is for the folks who haven't listened. And we'll share her website and social media for the podcast as well on the website.
Yeah, thank you. No, I always say tightendspodcast.com, go to the website, that kind of links you to everything. So that's kind of the best place to start. But I'm such a fan of podcasts, have been for a really long time. I'll be honest, I don't listen to a bunch of different ones. I kind of have my favorites, and time is a bunch of different ones. I kind of have my favorites, and time is limited. My interests are so varied that I find it hard to focus on one thing. But I've always had sort of this creative need, and my jobs have always been pretty technical and pretty like office type jobs, right? I've been administrative and that kind of thing. So I've always needed outside of work to have a creative outlet. And so I started sewing clothes, my own clothes, when I was 40 years old, just because I got tired of trying to find things I liked that weren't at this point old lady-ish. And I still wanted fun things. Nothing against Forever 21. I'm just saying I am not 21. And sure. So I started sewing, and then I had a blog about my sewing, mostly because my mom lived further away and she was interested in what I was doing. So I wrote on that blog, and I connected with community on there too. So I've always had sort of something kind of creative going on. Then my love led to me and another one of our coworkers starting Tight Ends Podcast. So I did have a regular co-host off the start, who has since left. She has, got married, had a child, and, things have gone on, and, she's moved on where we kind of got talking, and we said, there have to be other sort of, and it doesn't have to be wives, but in this case it was wives of huge like sports fans. And so much of our lives were kind of around sports, and we didn't really know much about football except, offense, defense. Our lives were kind of around sports, and we didn't really know much about football except, offense, defense, some of the teams, very few of the players. And so we thought there have to be other people like us who have sports kind of on the fringe of their lives, or like you take even vacations to go to games, things like that. But some of the teams, very few of the players. And so we thought there have to be other people like us who have sports kind of on the fringe of their lives, or like you take even vacations to go to games, things like that. But all the sports podcasts, like if you go to listen to a sports podcast, they're so highly technical and like stats related and that kind of thing. And that just be the same way as if you tell me the life story of a player. So we kind of said, hey, let's talk about players that we like. Let's talk about some of the antics they're up to. Let's talk about the charities they support and the things that they do that are great. And let's kind of bring a community together to kind of learn about football. And they're just, I call it
awesome. No, I really love it. And for sure, Vanda hasn't paid me yet, but there's a plug for just kidding, it's unpaid, like guest podcasting sometimes, but definitely into it because it's fun. I am a sports person and very competitive, but it's a podcast with that in there, but not, I agree, like if you turn on the ESPN and stuff, you can get lost down the random and the such random statistics that they now will like put together because they have all this data. Somebody's in the back is like, yes, so this is the first time a left-handed quarterback has ever started a game with the Eastern time zone in history. You're like,
yeah,
why is that a statistic? Why should I care? Like, yeah. So they get super like nerd out on that stuff.
Right. But if I hear the story
if
I hear the story about James Conner, if I hear the story about James Conner, the running back with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and how his lymphoma was diagnosed because of the medical he went through in college to play ball, and how he went on to beat that lymphoma and then was drafted by an NFL team, that's going to get me watching the game and watching the sport and rooting for someone, because it's just like a human story that just is like, every time I see James Conner, I'm like, look at that guy. He can do anything. And I mean, he beat cancer. He can do anything. So
for sure,
that's the kind of thing that we definitely talk about. And for example, Tom Brady, in our podcast, I pretty much always say, the quarterback for New England Patriots. We don't assume people even have a knowledge of kind of, that kind of thing, just because we don't want people to feel excluded when we start just dropping names and folks kind of, Tom Brady might be an extreme example, but we try our best to kind of just quickly say, oh, by the way, that's the quarterback, just so folks kind of know if they join us that they aren't immediately feeling like, oh, this is already over my head. So yeah, we just want everyone to feel kind of this community. And sports is so fun that it's just cool to find another interesting way to link people, and you don't have to claim to know it all. And it's sports can be fun. You don't have to be a know-it-all.
For sure. Absolutely is. For sure. Awesome. Absolutely is. For sure. Awesome. So, in that vein, as far as it being so it's a sports podcast. It's core sport that follows, of course, is football, and then you have other sports that come once football season's over or during overlapping seasons. So it's kind of branched into a lot of different areas of sports. But one episode that I want to talk about, and I'll try and maybe we can talk offline. You can send me the exact link to this one where you talked a bit about sports and mental health, and it was a very interesting and what I found to be powerful episode. Very, what I would say, vulnerable maybe might be the right word, in talking about your own history with mental health and struggles with mental health, and a bit about, what worked for you using sports and mental health to kind of, along with, whatever other like psychological stuff and tools that you work with. But like that was some of the more, I wouldn't say it's a departure from the lighthearted side, but it was something a little bit deeper that up to that point, I don't think y'all had driven that deep around the Tight Ends podcast, which I thought was interesting. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
No, for sure. From the very beginning, when Allison and I started the podcast, and we talk about anything not to do with sports. And the reason for that was because, like I said, I have this kind of varied interest in things, and I wanted to be able to bring stuff in that I was interested in and that kind of seemed cool to me, and that I thought, how do you introduce that into like a sports podcast where it doesn't feel weird? And I thought, well, how do you have football? Well, of course, it's your halftime show at the Super Bowl. So
right.
Yeah, so the halftime show has always been kind of something that, and again, a lot of times we delve into lighter kind of fare, but sometimes it's delved into other things as well. And anytime we talk about players that are open with what they're talking about, we delve into that too and talk about it. I have been really open in talking about my struggles with chronic depression since forever, really. I would say I was probably diagnosed with chronic depression since forever, really. I would say I was probably diagnosed with chronic depression in my early 20s, and it was about the same time that my dad was diagnosed. And so we as a family are extremely open in talking about things like that. I was in my early 20s, and it was about the same time that my dad was diagnosed. And so we as a family are extremely open in talking about things like that. I would say we're really ahead of the curve, because this would be like the early 90s. So we were open and talking to be talked about the same way people talk about a broken bone, diabetes. I always relate it to diabetes because I think, there's different levels of diabetes. There's different types of diabetes. Some people manage it just with diet and that kind of thing. Other people need medication on a regular basis for it. Talk about it openly. So when I was, doing the podcast, and I kind of thought, is this something? It came up a couple of different ways. I had a couple of different people talk to me about it. Hey, if you ever cover this topic, let me know. I can help you out. And so I thought, maybe let's go there. And so I did it as very open, follow the standard format. And we kind of call it, we go into overtime to talk about something that's more important, or something that's just different or whatever. And so I did it as an overtime episode, and reached out to a few different people, some who counsel youth using sports to kind of counsel them and direct them and kind of help them with, mental health issues and things. And I just tell kind of stories about different people that have been open, athletes that have been open about their struggles. And I think it's not doom and gloom, because the end result is you kind of have a person who's openly saying, I've dealt with chronic depression for almost 30 years, let's say, and I'm here and I'm doing a funny podcast, and I'm a successful person, successful by my definition, and I maintain relationships and have friends and everything else. And to me, it's just like a celebration that even though maybe you're struggling with something. It's like other people are, and other successful people are. And it's like other people are, and other successful people are. And the best thing we can do is to talk about it and open up and just take that stigma away, and let's just be open and talk about people are struggling. But it doesn't define who's the person. I'm a person who deals with depression.
Wow. Sorry, I was chewing something. I muted my mic so that it wasn't being.
That's okay. That's all right.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
I could talk about this forever. So yeah, it's just so huge to me.
For sure. Because I think honestly, everyone whether your specific case, as you said, is like the diagnosis of a chronic depression, but everyone, I think, at some point in their life, runs into some, whether to the levels of considered actual clinical depression or just struggling with an instance in their life that they're having problems with and they're upset about something or some version of that, right? It's kind of, there's a whole, right? It's kind of, there's a whole spectrum around there.
Grief is a whole nother subset. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So everyone has some level of that space, and being comfortable to, and I agreed, and many, a lot more, I think we as a society become less than it was stigmatized, but there's still in some spaces and some portions of society, I think, is still a lot further back than they probably could be. But I think it's good, like podcasts and similar things and tools, and like you said, celebrities and people talking about it, working through it, seeking help for it, and being visible about it, I think is helping to like move the needle slowly, opinions and views on it. So that's good.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And in Canada with the Bell Let's Talk campaign is sort of the Bell Let's Talk campaign is sort of a campaign that's nationwide, and then it extends to other places as well around the world. But it's kind of this day where folks kind of tweet out and kind of in other social media and kind of talk about taking the stigma away. And I think it's taking the stigma away. And I think it's been a number of years now. But it has sort of allowed people to see strong people who are dealing with this, and because it's seen as being weak so often,
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see a strong hockey player, I mean, in Canada, hockey players I can't believe they're not on the money. Do you know what I mean? Because like they're the thing. But when you see them open up about something, a struggle they have, then it's sort of to be able to put into identify what it is that they're struggling with. And I'll say, especially for men to have that example of someone that they can say, oh, I'm going through the same thing. And it's, the cost of not doing that is so high.
So I'm curious so that you did that overtime episode, you had the folks, it was really good. What kind of feedback did you get? Did you get any feedback from people who listen and thoughts on it, whether that be from your podcast network or other listeners around that? I'm curious how it was kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I never get enough feedback because I just always want to hear from people, and I try my best to kind of put things out so that they'll engage. I find that the hardest part of putting the podcast out, and then you just get nothing back, and you feel like, what is the reception to that? But the people up front who were willing to help meant a lot. I had other folks reach out to me and say they could never do that, but they're so happy that I did. And I love to, people are on different parts of their journey, right? Like you're not going to force anyone out different parts of their journey, right? Like you're not going to force anyone out into the light. You kind of are just going to like show them, hey, I'm out here and it's cool. Come on and join me.
Come out. The water's fine. It's okay.
Exactly. So I like I said, I never get enough feedback, but I like I said, I never get enough feedback, but the everything has certainly been positive about it, and I thought it's quite a departure for kind of my sort of brand, but I that's encouraged me to do more. I guess because I didn't hear really negative stuff. Do more. I guess because I didn't hear really negative stuff. Like stick to sports or anything. Uh, I'm not that important. But that's kind of led me to sharing it in other ways, and so different things. Like I did a book club over the summer with a book to do with how running can help you deal with depression and anxiety and things like that. So it's called Running with Mindfulness by William Pullen. So I had him on the podcast as well and kind of talked about it. So I felt okay because of the reaction to be able to drop in more of those things where I could. And I kind of think it's important for let's tune into a comedy sports podcast and get a little nugget of real life. Do you know what I mean? So
For sure.
yeah, like anyway, so that's kind of I've kind of been encouraged to drop those things in, and again, it's not in a doom and gloom sort of way because kind of deal with, but it actually can be something that brings you a lot of strength, which that's a whole nother episode.
For sure. That's kind of some of the premise ultimately in the Victory podcast, right? So we talked in earlier episodes, and if you haven't heard them, go back and listen, with various guests about with family and different things that come up in life, right? The idea is things that come up, everyone's got their things, we go through life, things come up. And being able to take tools from the different guests that we've had on, viewpoints that work, things that work for them. This is not, to be clear, this is not go running will solve all your, this is not, to be clear, this is not go running will solve all your depression issues or anything like that.
Yeah, no, gotta read the book.
I mean, read the book, seek, the proper mental health resources that are out there in your various parts of the world for those listening. But it's like, this worked for me, but it's like, this worked for me, try it out or use this in tandem with whatever other psychological methods you're working through. And at some point, probably close to the Christmas episode, I'll try and get my father-in-law on, who is a psychologist, not the MD, the PhD and stuff like that. But, got grad students, all that fun stuff. I'll get him on to kind of record and add some bits and pieces. But the idea is like, look, this is not in lieu of seeking help from professionals, as we all should. Like you said, like treat it like if your leg was broke, you'd go to the doctor and the leg doctor and get it fixed. So the idea of using the tools of life and religion and relationships and all that kind of stuff and applying that to your own life as you see fit. Just another resource out there for sure.
Exactly. So if you broke your leg, you go to the doctor does the cast and sets everything, but you can certainly talk to other friends who have broken their legs and they can say, what was helpful? Talk to other friends who have broken their legs and they can say, what was helpful is I set up a little drink caddy and I had all my little drinks there so that I didn't have to keep getting up on my crutch.
Getting up and crutch across, or I found this pogo's leg thing that made it so much easier to get around.
I got one of those reachy grabby.
Much easier to get around.
I got one of those reachy grabby things, that they have the seniors using. And so that's exactly it. It's not about excluding one or the other. It's like, of course you go to your medical professional. I mean, without question. For me, I always tell people, your family doctor is the best place to start. For me, I always tell people, your family doctor is the best place to start. Start there. But you can certainly take, and that's what I like about your podcast, you can take things from other places to supplement that. It's not replacing it because, depending on the level of the depression or anxiety, the intervention, but there's other ways to get some help and suggestions and things to help you along the way.
For sure. All right. Those are the main ticket items. So this wasn't actually as long. I thought it might go a little longer because we didn't get too tangential. We can go into like a deep rabbit hole. Bring it back. Yeah. So maybe
I could give some of my things that have helped me if you wanted.
For sure. Yeah. I was going to say any tips from you that maybe if you have a top 5, top 3, something like that is always good, like to kind of, if that works or whatever. Yeah, whatever tips that worked for you, of chronic depression, peaks and valleys, I'm sure, along the way. And some of the things that kind of help from those, helping you get out of some of those deeper valleys that happen along your journey, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, share a little bit about that.
So absolutely, I will say that sort of stepping stone to kind of start things, I guess, would definitely be my family doctor, where then you can get I got to say we're fortunate in Canada. We have all kinds of resources available to us. And so through my family doctor, I was able to see a counselor. I was also able to get in to see a psychiatrist. Those are different. I was also able to get in to see a psychiatrist. Those are different things. At different stages of things I was going through. So absolutely, like, do not discount going to your family doctor and getting the help there. I can tell you there's nothing you're going to tell them that they haven't heard. So go in and be honest and tell them what's going on so they can help you. And be honest and tell them what's going on so they can help you. Another thing that I would say is, and I learned it probably in my late 30s, was I don't have to cure this. So I lived for certainly over a decade. Just feeling like a failure every time I hit one of those valleys, and feeling like, oh, here we go again. You did it. You can't do it. You can't live a normal life. You can't keep, feeling like a failure. And it took me, I kind of said, so what if I have this forever? Like, am I going to beat myself up every, I don't know, 18, 24 months, whatever it is, that I hit kind of one of these lows? Am I just going to do this forever? Because my family, we live forever. Long time. No, I'm kidding. But so I thought, I have got to find a way to be kinder to myself. And so one of the books I read, and I want to say it was called Out of the Blue, it was many, many years ago. They sort of gave the idea of this might be something you chronically have, and you have to talk to yourself the way you would talk to a friend. And that struck me that I would never talk to a friend the way I spoke to myself when I was going through one of those valleys, one of those difficult times. I would never talk to, because I know I've talked to many friends about it, and I would never talk to them the way I talk to myself. So I really had to change my inner dialogue in how I spoke to myself in those times. And then just taking there's definitely ways to manage it, and you can have a great life, and I've had a great life. But you don't have to cure it. And that was such a weight off my shoulders to just think, okay, I'm allowed to deal with this the same way everyone else deals with their things and whatever struggles they're going through. And they just kind of, I got to do a little bit better on this, and this will help. What I found. I had one counselor as well who we talked about the importance of SENSS, SENSS. And that is sleep, exercise, nutrition, social support, and service to others. So if you take those 5 things, and what he did was I graded myself on it. And then we looked at ways we could improve the grade and things that needed to have the grade improved. And for me, this worked really well because I had like an action plan. I felt really good having a plan. I understand this may not work for everyone. Again, like I said, talk to your doctor. But for me, when I knew sleep was a big issue, and I thought, well, if I'm not sleeping well, then obviously that's not going to be good for my brain and good for everything else, and to deal with something that you're going through. I mean, the number one thing when you're not well is you need rest. So I did it again, and I was doing better. And that was such an eye-opening thing to think I can make changes and improve things. I'm not burdened and stuck with this. Right. And it's not making the decisions. I get to make the decisions. And that was just so helpful, to me. And then in terms of social support, definitely my congregation, and definitely my relationship with God as well was so important in recognizing that it kind of folded into that was service to others. So if you're kind of doing service for others, it makes them feel good, and it makes you feel good, and it does sort of take that focus off of, sometimes we need to focus on ourselves. We need to focus on ourselves and get better. But sometimes if you're living this, then your life is just illness. But if you step outside that and sort of reach out to others, that's good. I also appreciate, and I believe that, God doesn't have us sit back and pray and then fold our hands up and wait. I think the intention is to ask for help and then
exactly.
So make an effort that he can then turn around and bless. So that to me was just it was so many things that kind of it was wonderful to me to see that it was a number of things. It wasn't that it was a number of things. It wasn't that I was wrong or that I was just I was a defect. You know what I mean? It was like, no, there's certain things that I'm doing great, and there's other things I need to make some changes on. And just taking control of that felt so good. It's very hard to do when you're in the depths of it.
Yes.
So
sure.
I guess my last tip would be is don't wait to be in the depths. When you start heading, I call it downhill or down into the pit. And I have people close to me, especially my husband, where I can say, how am I doing? And he knows what that means. That means, is he seeing something happening?
Some of the
where I'm
sliding. The road work, like, it's coming, you're coming downhill. Don't keep going. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so you can then, make the turn and kind of get things back on track a lot easier if it's the beginning of the slide rather than right at the bottom. It's pretty difficult to do. And so, talking about it sounds like it's easy. It's not, but it is so, I feel such compassion for that person that was in that pit. I almost look at her like a different person. I know it was me, but I feel such compassion for her. And I am so proud of the fact that I saw her as worthy enough to do the work and to talk.
My tears too. This is why I'm glad we recorded just audio, not you can let sniffles roll down the face. Can be fine because this is an audio podcast, not YouTube.
Yes.
For sure. I am glad too. Yay.
Yeah, it is. So would say, is that person worth it? And it's like, you would never question, whether your friend is worth the effort. And it's the same for yourself, is you are worth the effort. And, I don't know. I wouldn't trade my life for it. Yourself is you are worth the effort. And, I don't know. I wouldn't trade my life for anyone's, right? I mean, I'm happy where I am. I'm where I want to be. And if part of my empathy for others stemmed out of my experience with depression, anyone's, right? I mean, I'm happy where I am. I'm where I want to be. And if part of my empathy for others stemmed out of my experience with depression, I don't know that I would want that to be gone, if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, for sure. For sure. Yeah. So those same capture a couple things, maybe I might throw it up as like another tool on the Victory Podcast website, just a couple of Vanda's tips to share with people, just to outline. I'll probably send it to you, Vanda, just to make sure I can capture.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah. Sure.
But yeah, similarly, when they were doing reorgs and restructurings, and as a expatriate being in another country, you're kind of at that time had much of a target on your back at the time, not in a malicious way, but in a we're very expensive way versus people domestically to do the same job. And I remember I went for ailment and then having difficulties through the complexities of the organization and all the things you have to go to get back and supervisory issues at the time that I really got into a bad mental space during that time, like when I was out with the medical leave stuff.
Yeah.
And I got to a place where I was like, I need to talk to someone. I need to talk to someone right now, because the thoughts, the mind map that your brain can kind of get into this like deep down the pit at full force with no brakes. And you start to see like, uh-oh. I was kind of like in that space, and I was like, broke down honestly in our apartment. I was like, broke down honestly in our apartment. I was like, I need to talk to somebody now. And so thankfully, so I recommend, this was my little note that or just tag on to that, is if you work for a company that has EAP services, which most bigger companies do, they leverage, different outside your EAP services. That's the kind of stuff that they're there for as a touch point, especially in the US where our healthcare system is not as good as Canada's. Sorry.
It's not. I mean, I think you have great healthcare. You just don't have access to it. You just don't have
access and cost.
Yeah.
Function can be challenging if you have those. In addition to if you have good healthcare, you like your services, reaching out to your family doctor, but definitely utilizing that as another way to kind of at least a touch point, especially in like a mayday, the brakes are out on this car going downhill type situation, which was the first time I had ever, and that's compounded of the work stuff's going on. I'm away from home. My structural, like some of that social services bit is a little bit hard. Hadn't found a church home in California, so didn't have that bit that was usually some of my So it was like layers, and it was just like, help. And so when I talked to the counselor, the first thing was like, okay, this thing, and then this thing. They're like, okay, did you eat today? Yeah. No. Okay, you should eat today. I was like, oh yeah, I should. It was one of those.
Yep.
Yeah, talk to yourself. Like, I would have told someone, did you eat today? Make sure you eat today. Let's focus on the things you can control. Like things that stepping back, and once you're out of that valley, you're like, I should. It was one of those.
Yep.
Yeah, talk to yourself. Like, I would have told someone, did you eat today? Make sure you eat today. Let's focus on the things you can control. Like things that stepping back, and once you're out of that valley, you're like, duh. Of course you should focus on of course those are the things I'm going to try and do, change, manage. But in the minute you're like, duh. Of course you should focus on of course those are the things I'm going to try and do, change, manage. But in the minute you're like, I'm in a mind map circle of this loop. And until you can like catch it, or someone else helps you stop and say, okay, I have to put a tree or something that out of the pit or the valley of stuff. So.
No, absolutely. And I like that. I know that you're, you have a faith in God as well. And so I appreciate that about you, because I do take strength from things like what your situation reminds me of is Ezekiel, and how God and him and so an angel comes to him and is like, get up and eat. It's like, it's almost exactly like what you're talking about, where even God recognizes you got to look after certain basic things first before, the angel didn't say, well, get out there, do your prophesying. What are you doing? Get up again. Like, so it's just, that just made me think of it. We were just talking about that recently in our congregation, but so just those practical things absolutely is so key to giving you the physical resource to then deal with kind of the other things. And I'm glad that yours came through successfully and things, but I'm sure you've learned and now have a certain empathy that, maybe you just didn't have the opportunity to have before. And it's always kind of, that experience you can use that to help others.
Exactly. I think for me, it wasn't that I've always been empathetic, but I never like fully that I now thankfully don't suffer with all the time, but I've never actually experienced a migraine. So my empathy was, I don't really understand it, but what do you need?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like a sympathy, right? It's like like you can certainly have a sympathy for someone once you've kind of you can, an empathy is almost like this deeper, like sometimes they say like walk in the shoes, but someone's like, oh, I've been in those shoes and I can sort of, understand what that, is like. And it's so it is a So it is a terrible thing. You don't want anyone to go through it.
Yeah,
But of all things, you do have to figure what can come out of this that actually is a positive, or what can I take out of it that can, help me kind of going forward. And that's kind of growth. That's the whole forward. And that's kind of growth. That's the whole way we end up with growth. So I
for
don't know.
sure.
It's, yeah.
For sure. Whew. All right. Eyes have been dabbed, tissues, blowing nose. I'll save that for the listeners not to hear and blow up their ears. But yeah, it's important. I mean, I think this is the whole, these kinds of deeper conversations was why I wanted to do a podcast, because I feel like talking about things, whether it be mental health, depression, career things, we'll get into some career episodes coming up, changing their career, doing different things with their career, and kind of some tools and tips and tricks around that space. But that's why I created this podcast, I like to talk, and I've always, for whatever reason, people that I meet, very soon after meeting, oftentimes we develop deeper conversations, maybe because I'm a deep person, but people feel I'm also nice to everyone. And
you are nice to everyone.
I really am. Well,
you
I just
are so nice.
And I give most people the benefit of the doubt until they fully show themselves. So I'm going to give context. Most people the benefit of the doubt until they fully show themselves. So I'm going to give context of, I'm going to assume that you didn't mean to do this thing that was probably silly. And then usually 90% of the time it's like, yeah, it was a miscommunication. It was a not clarity on whatever and whatever. I'm nice to everyone. I operate, and this comes from my Christian combination of things. Being from the South, everyone's nice. Mm-hmm. It's yes. Okay. Most people are raised to be nice. Let me put it that way. Not everyone is nice. The other side is my family I grew up with my dad. They will talk to everyone. Hi, how are you doing? The airplane attendant, the CEO sitting next to you, every single person I'm going to treat exactly the same. And it surprises people, especially in my career path, that people, that's the so-and-so. I'm like, okay, we're all putting pants on. We're all putting pants on. Yes. The running joke is that we all put our pants on the same way, head first, backflip onto the bed. No, I'm kidding. Oh, that's just me? Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because I end up, at work in the elevator with, certain whatever, whatever are supposed to be with the executive team and things like that. I always they're people. Like, we're all just heading to work.
We're just people.
And I just think sometimes they're treated with kid gloves, and I just think sometimes they're treated with kid gloves, and I think they sometimes appreciate me because I talk to them like people, and we teased the one president who was as well an American coming up to Canada. I think he was Texan, and teasing him about the Canadian winters and things like that. And it's be as kind to the cashier at the grocery store, and show the same kindness to the president or the CEO. It doesn't. Everyone are like, we're people, and you can. My husband says the same thing. He's like, does the grocery cashier have to hear our life story?
I'm like, if it comes up contextually, like, oh yeah, like in the grocery line, how are you doing today? And then sometimes they'll be like, oh, what you making tonight? I'm like, oh, doing chili and this thing. It's like, yeah, it should be good. All right, cool.
Yeah.
And my husband's not more introverted, especially if it's a topic he's really passionate about, then he can talk all day. But if it's not, small talk is not his forte or anything he really gets into. So balances.
No, exactly. And I've tried to tone it down. I mean, on airplanes, you don't want to be sitting next to the woman race relations with America.
Yeah, I read the room pretty good too when people are ready to, like, all right, put my headphones on. And I'm not on all 24/7 too. I really, on the opposite side, sometimes when I get on the plane, 90% of the time, first thing I want to do is lean against my window seat and go to sleep. It makes the plane go to sleep. makes the plane go faster. But
I've also had great conversations with people on the plane who were willing to talk. And you know, again, you just learn all kinds of things if people are open to kind of talking about it. And again, it's not like the whole 4 hours. It's maybe 20 minutes while the plane taxis and things, but 4 hours, it's maybe 20 minutes while the plane taxis and things. But I don't know, just make yourself open to connections, and I don't know, just take all those life experiences, and like we talked about, that's what moves people forward is their life experiences. So
I met I think I was coming back from maybe a training somewhere, so I think I was coming back to California from either New Orleans going home or from a training somewhere else in the US, like Wilmington, Delaware, and career path type thing was coming. I was like, who on the same plane sitting next to each other, someone in the same similar career path getting their CIH kind of stuff. It was just really funny. They were going to maybe interview for a job or something. I don't know. And I thought it was really hilarious. I was like, of all people.
I know. I sat next to.
It was really hilarious. I was like, of all people.
I know. I sat next to a screenwriter, and he was like watching a TV show, and then he would turn to his laptop and he was writing lines in a screenplay.
Wow, that's funny.
Yeah, and so I think he was writing for a television sitcom, and I didn't know the show. I'll be honest. I think it was like a young person type show. Like one of those. I don't even know the stations because I don't have kids and I don't watch any of that stuff. But
like a kid show.
Yeah, like is Nickelodeon still a thing? Like it would be one of those type of shows.
It's a thing. I have I'm dead. Just I have no idea what's on there, but yes, it's still a show.
Okay, so because we don't have Nickelodeon obviously in Canada, but anyways, it was that type of show I think, and he was like writing, and then but then we got talking, and of course he's super into TV. That's why he's a TV writer, and so we got talking about our favorite shows and stuff, and it was kind of cool to like be able to have this kind of he mentioned a couple shows I hadn't seen, so I'm like, oh okay, I got to check that out. If you like all the things I like and that, I've got to check that out. So it's always kind of cool. So. But again, I try not to, I read the room. I read the plane.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Okay, so that's good. For sure. Cool. Okay, so that's good. So maybe as we kind of wrap up, we can talk a little bit about your social media and some info and Tight Ends Podcast and where people can find you.
All right, so the best place to go first always is tightendspodcast.com, the website. The episodes are on all the show notes with links to like hilarious things and Cam Newton in a headscarf and things like that. That's the episode.
Did you talk about that in your next episode? Because if so, I have
that episode's
so many comments.
Yeah.
The memes. The memes that exist.
Well, then you can find links to other things. But I am on Instagram at the Tight Ends. Twitter is my favorite social media at the Tight Ends. I also have a Facebook page that I'm terrible at, but I do answer things. Tight Ends Podcast page on Facebook. But yeah, and then podcasts, we're on there and available. And I think most folks would enjoy kind of listening to some lighthearted chat about sports, and you might learn something. And if nothing else, you'll get a few laughs out of it, I'm sure.
For sure. It definitely is funny. And we'll link to Tight Ends Podcast, and I'll try and things in the notes with this episode. I'll try and probably get it out tonight. But thanks, Vanda, for joining and chatting. As always, it's fun.
I know. I'm glad that we have podcasts so that we can keep up our friendship after you left work. I mean, usually people leave work.
For joining and chatting. As always, it's fun.
I know. I'm glad that we have podcasts so that we can keep up our friendship after you left work. I mean, usually people leave work, let alone go to another country. Usually lose touch, but it's been great to be able to keep up with you, and let alone go to another country. Usually lose touch, but it's been great to be able to keep up with you, and yeah, I'll be through your airport there on Friday. So
so funny.
Look for my plane.
I'll wave in the air around that time, be like, hey, she's at the airport. Yeah, that airport is about it. If you were at the San Jose one, maybe I would be like, oh, I'll just pass by. But there's not much. It's the whole go through security, back through security. Like,
Absolutely. I don't want them to pull my luggage and stuff because that
it's
would
like
be
a whole
terrible.
thing.
As a
Yeah.
Canadian crossing the border, I want to follow all your rules as closely as I
Yes,
possibly
please
can.
do. In the current administration, especially. Your leader, because he can, I don't know, who knows why. Your leader can out push up our guy by 1,000 times. Like, I'm worried if Trump did a push up, all of a sudden our vice president would be president. So
No comment.
no comment officially. I'll edit it out. It'll be fine. I have no sponsors. No one's listening. This all is going to the void of life. No one's listening. No,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But you can at me, real Donald Trump. I don't care.
Oh, that'd be great publicity.
Oh, it would blow me up. I would be done. I would quit my job and like become a professional podcaster.
I know. It's like when I talk about the Patriots and I like don't even say allegedly because I just really want them to come at me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was like, please do.
Yeah.
You might get Gronk back. Who knows? He's retired now. Who knows? He's got time. Who knows? He's retired now. Who knows? He's got time. If I ever find a sports connection, because my dad's friend is the sports agent and represents like Marshall Falk and a couple of people and a couple like linemen and stuff and on a couple of teams. If there's ever an opportunity, like, yo, I have a friend and she's got a sport, and you're like, whatever situation comes up, 100%, you're the person I'll pass it on to and send them your info.
That would be amazing because we have our regular What's Up with Gronk segment. But this week he may not be very happy with me because I talk about his comments about concussions and how he fixed himself. And I'm, brain after 20
Did he do a brain transplant?
I don't know. It's probably CBD related.
Oh, Lord. Gronk waves fist in air.
Yeah, he may not be thrilled about my comments this week, but generally we just have a lot of fun about him. But I was like, comments this week, but generally we just have a lot of fun about him. But I was like, yeah, talk to neuroscientists over Gronk when you're talking about your concussion.
Yeah, he's my resource for neuroscience and brain things. Let me tell you, of all the players in the National Football, past, present, past, present, or future, not on anywhere near the list. Sorry.
If you want the hottest club in Miami, please reference.
That's my dude. Then I'm gonna let him. If I want to know,
go-to resource. But please, if you're talking about brain injury
and stuff, yeah,
resource. But please,
if
you're talking about brain injury
and stuff, yeah, he's not. No, not who. No, I'm more apt to call my sister because she's in medical school. That's probably my first touch point.
You know what? I think that's great. But yeah.
All right. Thanks, Vanda, and check out all the good info.
Awesome. Thank you.
Once again, thanks to Vanda for sitting down and chatting about a really personal topic, but that's something that she's pretty open, as you can gather by the interview. And if you're looking to reach out to Vanda, hear more about Tight Ends Podcast and all the fun activities that she's, look at the show notes and links that are provided there. But go ahead and check her out at Tight Ends Podcast. That's TIGHTENDS podcast.com. And of course, you can find all of our social media ways to comment, share your concerns, questions at The Victory Podcast. That's THE Victory VICTORY podcast.com. So let's go ahead and end this episode like we do every episode. Every problem has a solution. It's whether you're willing to do the work to find it.